The music was low enough to feel intentional, not soft, controlled. The kind of sound chosen so people could still hear danger move across the room if it needed to. Glasses clinked quietly. Laughter stayed restrained, measured, careful not to cross into confidence. This was a private gathering, invitation only, and everyone inside knew exactly whose air they were breathing. He arrived without announcement. He always did. No raised voices. No dramatic entrance. The space simply adjusted around him, like gravity had shifted and everything else had learned to lean. Men straightened. Women lowered their eyes. Conversations didn't stop. They thinned, became quieter, safer. Fear here was not loud. It was trained. She was standing near the edge of the room when he noticed her. Not performing. Not trying to be seen. Just present. That alone was unusual. Most people here were either visible on purpose or invisible by design. She was neither. Her posture wasn't submissive, but it wasn't defiant either. It was neutral, as if she hadn't been briefed on how dangerous neutrality could be. His gaze lingered longer than it should have. Few seconds too many. The men closest to him noticed immediately. They always noticed first. A ripple moved through the room. Not panic, not yet, but anticipation. The kind that comes before something irreversible. He didn't raise his voice when he spoke. He didn't need to. I want you tonight. The sentence wasn't aimed at the room, but it landed everywhere. Music seemed to thin even further, as if the sound itself was trying to escape. Someone near the bar froze mid-motion, glass still in hand. Another woman instinctively took a step back, as though the words might strike at random. Everyone knew what the sentence meant. It wasn't a request. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't anger. It was ownership spoken in advance. All eyes moved to her. This was the moment everyone expected: panic, stutter, tremor, tears maybe. Fear had many acceptable shapes here, but it had to appear. Fear was how the room stayed alive. She didn't move. She didn't gasp. Didn't shrink. Didn't smile. Her face didn't harden either. That was the unsettling part. She simply turned fully toward him, as if acknowledging someone who had spoken her name in a crowded place. Her expression held no challenge, no flirtation, no calculation anyone else could recognize. Just stillness. That was when the room truly froze. Because defiance would have made sense. Submission would have made sense. Even fear would have restored order. What she offered instead was absence. An absence of the reaction everyone relied on to know where they stood. One of the men near him shifted, ready to step forward, to remind her how this worked. The boss lifted a single finger. Not sharply. Casually. The man stopped instantly. She noticed that too. For the first time, something like curiosity crossed her face. Not about him but about the rules around him. This was the moment safety stopped being assumed. People here survived by understanding patterns, by predicting outcomes, by knowing which mistakes were fatal and which were forgiven. Her response didn't fit any pattern they knew. And unpredictability, in a room like this, was more dangerous than rebellion. "You heard me," he said, not louder but closer. He had moved without anyone seeing the step. The distance between them closed, not aggressively but decisively. "I did," she replied. Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't bold either. It was steady, like someone stating a fact rather than negotiating a future. A breath left the room all at once. She wasn't refusing. She wasn't agreeing. She was standing in a space no one else dared occupy, the pause between command and consequence. Men around them watched his face carefully now. This was the second danger point. The first had been his sentence. The second was how he would respond to her lack of fear. Power tolerated many things. Indifference was rarely one of them. He studied her openly now. Not her body, her composure, her eyes. The way she stood without bracing herself for impact. People who had nothing left to lose sometimes looked like this. Or people who didn't yet understand the cost of standing still. Everyone out, he said calmly. No explanation. No urgency. But chairs moved immediately. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Within seconds, the room emptied, leaving behind silence that felt heavier than noise. She didn't move even then. That was the third mistake or the first choice. No one watching could tell which. The doors closed. The music stopped completely. The air changed. Now it was just the two of them. And the guards who pretended not to exist. He looked at her again, slower this time. Most people begged by now. Or calculated. Or broke. She did none of it. Which raised a question no one else had ever made him ask so early. Why didn't she react like everyone else? The silence stretched long enough to become a test. Not a pause. A measurement. He had learned to read people in the gaps between words, in the instinctive reactions they couldn't train away. Most filled silence with fear. Others filled it with calculation. She filled it with nothing at all. He watched her closely now, not like prey, not like possession, but like a problem that had arrived without warning. You understand what I said, he told her. It wasn't a question. Her answer came without delay. Yes. One syllable. Clean. No tremor. No edge. The kind of response that should not exist in a room like this. The guards shifted slightly behind him. They felt it too. This was wrong. Fear had always been his leverage. He didn't threaten. He didn't repeat himself. He stated a desire, and the world rearranged itself to meet it. People broke long before he ever had to touch them. That was how control worked. Till now. Most people, he said, circling her slowly, start explaining themselves by this point. She tracked his movement with her eyes, not her body. Where? I'm not most people, she replied. Not defiant. Not proud. Just factual. Something tightened in his chest. Not anger. Not desire. Recognition of a pattern failing. Then tell me what you are, he said. This was the second test. Labels revealed fear. Backgrounds revealed leverage. She shook her head once. That would change the conversation, she said. And I don't think you'd like where it leads. One of the guards inhaled sharply. That sentence alone would have ended anyone else. He raised his hand again. Silence returned instantly. He studied her face for cracks. There were none. No false confidence. No rehearsed courage. This wasn't someone trying to be brave. This was someone operating under a different rule set entirely. You don't flinch, he observed. Not when I speak. Not when the room empties. Not when I stand this close. She met his eyes fully now. You're waiting for fear, she said. I don't use it the way other people do. That unsettled him more than defiance ever could. Fear was universal. It equalized power. Remove fear and the hierarchy collapsed. He stopped moving. The distance between them was deliberate now. Then what do you use, he asked. She hesitated. The first hesitation. Not long. Just enough to register. I pay attention, she said. That was when his interest sharpened into focus. Not curiosity. Assessment. He noticed details now he hadn't before. The way her hands rested open at her sides instead of clenched. The way her breathing hadn't changed since the doors closed. The way she spoke as if consequences were already accounted for. You knew what would happen when you didn't react, he said. You knew I wouldn't let that pass. Yes, she said again. And you stayed, he added. I did. He circled her once more, slower, closer. This time she didn't track him with just her eyes. Her body turned slightly. Defensive but controlled. Why? The word came out quieter than he intended. She answered just as softly. Because running would have confirmed the wrong thing. His jaw tightened. And what is the right thing? She held his gaze without blinking. That I'm not afraid of you, she said. The room seemed to contract around them. Not because of the words but because of what they implied. Fear had always been his leverage. And she had just stepped outside it. That's a dangerous mistake, he said. Not as a threat. As a statement. Only if it's a mistake, she replied. That was the moment something shifted irreversibly. Not in the room. In him. He had dealt with defiance. He had crushed courage. He had broken people who thought they were immune. But this wasn't resistance. This was immunity. And immunity demanded containment, not force. He stopped in front of her. Close enough now that anyone else would have faltered. He didn't. You don't know who I am, he said. I know exactly who you are, she replied. I just don't let it decide how I stand. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Not because of danger. Because of possibility. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure whether he was holding power, or whether it was slipping quietly into something else. And as he watched her calm expression, a question surfaced that unsettled him far more than her lack of fear. Was her composure bravery, or ignorance? Fear had rules. She knew them because she had lived inside them long before she ever stepped into this room. Fear promised loss. Fear threatened pain. Fear whispered consequences until people folded. But fear only worked when there was still something left to take. She had learned that the hard way. Years earlier, in a place no one in this city remembered and no one bothered to look for, fear had already done its worst. It had taken her family quietly, one absence at a time. A brother who didn't come home. A mother who stopped speaking before she stopped breathing. A father who taught her how to be invisible and died believing it would save her. Fear had burned through her life like a slow fire, consuming everything it touched until there was nothing left but the habit of standing. That was the part people misunderstood. They thought courage came from hope. Didn't. Came from exhaustion. When she looked at him now, she wasn't seeing a man who could ruin her life. She was seeing a man who was late. He felt it. He couldn't name it yet, but he sensed the absence he couldn't fill. Most people carried fear like a shield. He shattered it and stepped through. With her there was nothing to break. She wasn't defying him. She wasn't resisting. She was operating without the very mechanism his power relied on. You don't react the way you should, he said finally. The room was empty now. Guards posted outside. Privacy secured. This wasn't performance anymore. This was examination. I reacted years ago, she replied. I just finished. That answer unsettled him more than anger would have. He had built his empire on leverage. On identifying pressure points and applying force until compliance followed. Every person had something. Family. Reputation. Desire. Fear tied them all together. She had none of it left in usable form. Everyone protects something, he said. Even if they pretend they don't. She shook her head slowly. That's the lie, she said. People think protecting something makes them strong. Doesn't. It makes them predictable. He watched her carefully. The calm in her voice wasn't practiced. It was settled, like a conclusion reached long ago. He realized then that her indifference wasn't passive. It was active. It rejected the game entirely. That made her dangerous. Not to his body. To his control. You should be afraid of me, he said. Not as a threat. As an observation. I know, she answered. I just don't let it matter. When fear dies, power loses its grip. He felt that truth land like a quiet insult. His presence had always been enough to tilt rooms. To reorder priorities. To make people choose survival over dignity. She stood there unchanged. That meant the usual consequences wouldn't land. Threats would escalate without effect. Punishment would look like cruelty, not control. He couldn't frighten her into obedience. Which meant if he wanted obedience, he would need something else. What happened to you? He asked before he could stop himself. It wasn't curiosity. It was calculation searching for a missing variable. She considered him for a moment. Enough, she said. That was all. No details. No confession. She wasn't hiding. She simply wasn't offering. He realized then that her past didn't weaken her. It armored her in a way he couldn't penetrate. Loss had already taken everything fear could threaten. There was nothing left to hold hostage. That made her unpredictable, uncontainable under normal rules. He stepped back, creating space deliberately. A concession he hadn't made in years. "You understand what standing like this invites," he said. "Yes," she replied. "And you're still here," he noted. "So are you," she said. The air shifted. Not charged. Realigned. He saw it clearly now. Her indifference wasn't a flaw. It was leverage inverted. It forced him to choose between escalation and adaptation. Violence would gain him nothing. Intimidation would fail. Ignoring her would leave a variable unresolved. That left only one path. Control through proximity. Through ownership of consequence rather than fear. He looked at her with new intent. Not hunger. Not anger. Strategy. "People like you," he said slowly, "are dangerous because you don't need permission to stand." She met his gaze without blinking. "People like you," she replied, "are dangerous because you don't know what to do when standing doesn't hurt." That was the moment the threat changed shape. Not loud. Not immediate. But irreversible. Her indifference had shifted the balance, and he knew it. The question was no longer whether he could control her. It was what a man like him did when control stopped working, and walking away was not an option. Protection didn't arrive with a question. It arrived with footsteps. Two men appeared at her side when she left the room, not touching her, not blocking her path, simply existing too close to ignore. Their presence rewrote the space around her. Hallways widened and narrowed at the same time. Doors opened before she reached them. Conversations stopped when she passed. He didn't walk beside her. He didn't need to. Control worked better at a distance. "This isn't necessary," she said as they reached the car waiting outside. The door was already open. Engine running. Tinted glass reflecting a version of herself that looked smaller than she felt. "It is," one of the men replied, voice neutral, trained. Not a threat. Not an apology. A statement. She looked back toward the building. He stood just inside the entrance, framed by light, watching without expression. He hadn't ordered this loudly. He hadn't announced anything. That was the point. Protection didn't need spectacle. Needed compliance. She hesitated. A fraction of a second. Long enough to register the narrowing options. Walking away would turn attention into pursuit. Refusing the car would create a scene he didn't want and she couldn't win. She stepped inside. The door closed softly. Locks engaged with a sound too quiet to protest. The city moved past the window like a film she no longer controlled. She realized then that nothing had been said about where they were going. That omission mattered. "I didn't ask for this," she said into the space. The driver didn't respond. The man beside her didn't look at her. Silence wasn't neglect. It was policy. When they arrived, the building wasn't unfamiliar, just nondescript enough to be forgettable. Secure. Clean. Temporary in the way permanent arrangements always are at first. Inside, the air smelled neutral. No personal touches. No warmth. The room she was shown to had a view, a bed, a chair placed at a precise angle. There were no locks on the inside. There didn't need to be. "I can leave," she said. The man at the door inclined his head slightly. "You can request to," he replied. That phrasing settled in her chest. Request, not decide. He arrived later. Not immediately. Time was another tool. When he did enter, he didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He assessed. "This is temporary," he said. "Until what?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He moved to the window, looked out at the city like it belonged to him because it did. "Until attention passes," he said. "Attention from who?" He turned then. Met her gaze. "From people who would use you to reach me." She felt the net tighten without a single rope being visible. "So you're protecting yourself," she said. "I'm protecting the situation," he replied. The distinction was deliberate. It removed her from the center of the equation while placing her inside it. You didn't ask me, she said. He nodded once. Asking creates refusal, he said. Refusal creates risk. She laughed quietly, surprised by the sound. So you remove choice and call it safety. Choice is a luxury, he said. I remove it when it endangers outcomes. Her movements began to shrink after that. Early. She noticed it in the pauses. The way doors opened only after someone checked a screen. The way routes changed without explanation. The way conversations stopped before she entered rooms and resumed after she left. Slightly altered. She wasn't confined. She was curated. Each hour carried the same unspoken message. You are safer when predictable. This feels like ownership, she said one evening, standing near the window. The city lights blinked like signals she couldn't answer. It isn't, he said. Ownership implies permanence. And this doesn't. He didn't respond. Silence can be an admission when denial would be weaker. Protection feels different when it removes choice. She felt it in her body first. The way her steps slowed because there was nowhere to go quickly. The way her voice softened because volume changed nothing. The way sleep came easier not because she felt safe, but because resistance had nowhere to land. He watched her adjust. Not with satisfaction. With interest. The kind reserved for systems under stress. She realized then that this wasn't shielding. It was acquisition without ceremony. He wasn't saving her from danger. He was defining it. And the question wasn't whether she was protected. It was whether protection was simply the first stage of being claimed. The truth didn't arrive as a confession, it arrived as a correction. She noticed it when he stopped asking questions about her and started answering them instead. He knew where she'd grown up. The job she'd left without notice. The friend she stopped visiting 2 years ago. He referenced these things casually, like background noise, as if they'd always been his. You did your homework, she said. Trying to keep her voice evened, he didn't smile. This wasn't homework, he replied. It was vetting. The word landed heavier than any threat. That was when the story shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. She had believed his interest began in that room, with the music low and the order spoken. She had believed she was an anomaly that caught his attention by accident. But accidents don't come with files. He crossed to the table and set something down between them, a thin folder, not thick, not dramatic. Just enough. I was aware of you months before we met, he said. She didn't open it, she didn't need to. Why? She asked. He considered the question like it deserved respect. Because you were surviving situations that break people, he said. And you weren't loud about it. Her throat tightened. She had learned early that silence kept predators bored, he continued. You didn't seek protection, you didn't seek power, you avoided both. That's not a reason, she said. It is to me, he replied. He explained it slowly, not to comfort her, but because precision mattered. People who wanted something from him were predictable, people who feared him were manageable, people who admired him were dangerous, but people who didn't register him at all. Those were rare, and rarity was leverage. You weren't selected because I wanted you, he said. You were selected because others couldn't move you. The word selected echoed in her chest like a locked door. She stood, pace tightening the room. So this was always happening, she said. No matter what I did. Your choices influenced the timeline, he corrected. Not the outcome. That was the moment. Staying and leaving switched places in her mind. Leaving had always been the instinct, the last clean line. But now she saw the edges of it. If she walked away now, whatever interest had been quiet would become loud, without his structure, without his rules, attention without containment. She understood then why the men never touched her. They didn't need to, she was already inside the system. You could have left me alone, she said. He met her gaze without blinking. You were never alone. He replied. You were just unclaimed. The room felt smaller, not because of walls, but because of options narrowing to points. She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. So what? She said. I'm an investment? He didn't deny it. Investments are protected, he said. And controlled. And disposed of, she finished. He tilted his head slightly. Only when they depreciate. She opened the folder then, not because she wanted answers, but because refusing to look would be pretending pages. She recognized handwriting that wasn't his. Name surfaced, she froze. "Who is that?" she asked, already knowing. He didn't answer immediately. That delay was intentional. "Someone who understood patterns," he said. "Someone who thought you'd be useful to me." Her chest tightened. The listener orientation line formed in her mind without words. This was no longer attraction, it was selection. And selection meant others had seen her first. "You were pointed out," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Yes." "By who?" He closed the folder with care. "By someone who thought you'd soften me," he said. "They were wrong." The silence after that wasn't empty, it was full of consequences. She realized then that leaving now wouldn't restore her life, it would erase it. Staying meant rules, but leaving meant exposure to whoever had marked her, to whoever believed she could be used again. She sat back down slowly, not in surrender, in calculation. He watched her choice register, not pleased, not threatened, interested. "You see it now," he said. She met his gaze. "I see that I was never invited," she replied. "I was chosen." He didn't correct her, because she was finally right. And somewhere in the city, someone had whispered her name first. She felt it before anyone said her name out loud. The way conversations dipped when she entered a room. The way eyes tracked her movement instead of his. She had stood beside power before, but always as background. Now she was foreground, and that changed the math. He didn't announce her, no introductions, no explanations. That silence did more damage than a declaration. People noticed patterns: who sat where, who waited, who was allowed to speak over whom. And most importantly, who was not removed. She wasn't touched. She wasn't corrected. She wasn't dismissed. That alone was enough. The first whisper reached her through a laugh that ended too quickly. "That's her." Not admiration. Not curiosity. Inventory. She understood then that attention didn't arrive loudly, it arrived as calculation. She noticed how guards adjusted when she moved closer to him. Not protective, not threatening positioning. She wasn't being shielded, she was being framed. He didn't ask if she wanted to attend meetings, she was simply present, now seated, now standing. Now walking beside him through corridors designed to narrow perception. She tried to fall back once. He slowed without looking at her. That was instruction, not courtesy. The listener orientation line settled heavy in her chest. Visibility is expensive in violent worlds. She began to feel the cost in small ways first. The pause before doors opened. The extra check at entrances. The unfamiliar faces rotating through security. She realized his enemies weren't watching him anymore, they were watching her. Because power rarely changed hands through strength, it changed through leverage. And leverage was always softer than steel. She confronted him when the room finally emptied. "People are noticing," she said. He didn't deny it. "They were always going to," he replied. "When?" she corrected. He met her eyes then. "Now." That single word carried consequence. She realized then that the timeline had shifted. Visibility wasn't a mistake, it was a phase. He had allowed it. She didn't know whether to be angry or afraid. "Why now?" she asked. He answered without hesitation. "Because hiding you longer would raise suspicion," he said. "And revealing you too suddenly would invite panic." She stared at him. "So this is controlled exposure?" "Yes." The word controlled echoed like a locked gate. She laughed under her breath. "You talk about me like I'm volatile material." He didn't smile. "You are," he said. "To the wrong people." That night, the whispers turned directional. Not just about her presence, but about her value. Someone asked quietly how close she was to him. Another speculated whether she influenced decisions. A third wondered aloud what would happen if she vanished. None of them asked if she mattered. The first direct threat didn't arrive as violence, it arrived as absence. A familiar guard reassigned, no explanation. A route changed, no notice. A meeting cancelled because of a conflict. She understood the message. Someone was testing the perimeter. She confronted him again. This time her voice wasn't steady. "You said protection," she said. "This feels like bait." He watched her carefully. "Protection doesn't remove risk," he replied. "It concentrates it. On me." He didn't argue. She realized then that safety had inverted. Staying near him didn't reduce danger, it refined it. She became a single point of focus, and focus was easier to eliminate than an empire. "If I disappear," she said slowly, "what happens?" He considered the question longer than she liked. Several people benefit, he said. Several lose leverage. And you? He looked at her. I lose time. That answer chilled her more than fear. She wasn't irreplaceable, she was efficient. She understood then why enemies calculated quietly. Not because killing her would hurt him emotionally, but because removing her would force him to respond, and responses exposed patterns. That night she couldn't sleep. Not because she feared death, but because she feared usefulness. Usefulness kept you alive only as long as it served someone else. She stood at the window watching the city breathe below, lights blinking. Like signals. She felt watched even in silence, she asked herself the question she'd avoided since the beginning. Who benefits if she disappears? The answer wasn't singular, it was layered. Enemies who wanted reaction. Allies who wanted distraction. And someone somewhere who had pointed her out first, and hadn't finished using her yet. He didn't plan to say it. The words surfaced the way fractures do under pressure, not dramatic, not loud. Just inevitable. They were alone for once, no guards in the immediate doorway, no advisors pretending not to listen. The silence between them was unfamiliar, and silence had always been his ally. She spoke first, not accusing, just precise. You're losing control, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. No, he replied. I'm becoming aware of it. That was worse. She stepped closer, not because she trusted him, but because distance had stopped meaning safety. Aware of what? She asked. He looked at her then. Really looked, not as position, not as leverage, not as risk. You, he said. The word landed heavier than any threat. The listener orientation line crept through the moment like a warning siren. When a monster feels, the city pays. She felt it too, the shift. Not in the room, but in him. The way his shoulders carried tension differently. The way his breathing wasn't regulated anymore. He had spent a lifetime mastering reaction. Violence had never rattled him. Betrayal hadn't either, but standing in front of her, unarmed and unhidden, he looked unguarded. You don't react the way people should, he continued. You don't calculate your words for survival. She didn't interrupt. She sensed instinctively that if she did, the moment would seal shut. You don't fear me, he said. And that should make you dead. She met his gaze. But it doesn't. No, he agreed quietly. It makes me unstable. The admission was dangerous, not emotionally, strategically. She understood that better than he expected. In his world, instability didn't mean weakness. It meant unpredictability, and unpredictability forced others to adapt violently. You should push me away, she said. He nodded. I know. You should send me somewhere far from you. I know. You should stop putting me in rooms where people can see me. I know. She swallowed. Then why don't you? He exhaled slowly. Because when you're not here, he said, everything goes quiet again. That confession cracked something open. She saw it then. The cost. He wasn't feeling affection, he was feeling sensation. After years of emotional anesthesia, her presence had restored nerve endings, and nerve endings screamed. She stepped back instinctively. That movement triggered him more than her closeness. Don't, he said too quickly. The word carried panic. She froze, not because she obeyed, but because she recognized the sound. He took a breath, regaining composure, but it didn't fully return. This is what I mean, he said. I don't issue commands like that. She said nothing. The silence pressed harder. He turned away from her, hand braced on the table. I've made decisions this week I wouldn't have made before, he continued. I've spared people I should have removed. I've redirected resources without reason. I've allowed inefficiencies. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. My lieutenants noticed. Her chest tightened. So I'm a liability. He looked back at her. You're a catalyst. That was worse. She felt the irreversible shift settle in. Emotional attachment had replaced strategy. He wasn't planning around outcomes anymore. He was reacting to proximity. She understood the danger immediately, not to herself, to everyone else. What happens, she asked carefully, when someone uses me against you? His jaw tightened. They won't get the chance. That's not an answer, she said. It's a threat. He didn't deny it. This is what it costs, he said. This feeling. She heard the truth underneath. He wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of what he'd do to keep her. You don't get to feel, she said softly, without consequences. He stepped toward her again. This time she didn't retreat. I know, he said. And I'm already paying. Outside the room, a distant sound echoed, a door slamming, voices raised, then silenced. He didn't flinch, she did, that was the difference. She realized then that the city had already begun to absorb the cost of his attachment. She was no longer adjacent to power. She was embedded in it. And power didn't protect what it loved, it consumed around it. She asked the question she already feared the answer. 2. What does this change? She asked. Everything, he said without hesitation, and somewhere beyond the walls, someone else was already bleeding for it. He framed it like mercy, that was the first warning. They were in the car when he said it. The city slid past the tinted glass, light smearing into anonymity. He didn't look at her when he spoke, which told her everything. I can make you disappear, he said. Tonight. The words were calm, prepared, not emotional. She waited, he continued. New name, new history, new country, no trace back to me. He finally turned to her. You'd be safe. The listener orientation line settled into the moment like a weight. Visibility is a declaration. She understood what he was offering, not freedom, containment elsewhere. She pictured it instantly, a quiet life under another sky, no one knowing who she had been, no one watching how close she stood to danger, but also no agency, no truth, just a longer shadow. She asked the question he didn't want. Who would I be disappearing from? He didn't answer right away. That pause narrowed her options more than any threat. Everyone, he said finally. Including me. There it was. The escape wasn't about her safety, it was about reducing exposure. He could continue ruling without the variable she represented. She exhaled slowly. And if I refuse? His jaw tightened. Then I'll have to protect you here. She almost laughed. Here meant visible, here meant counted, here meant leverage. She leaned back in the seat. You're not offering me a choice, she said. You're offering me relocation of control. He didn't deny it. This is how people survive, he replied. By letting me move them. She looked at him then. Really looked, not the myth, not the reputation, the man who had admitted feeling something he couldn't regulate. You don't want me gone, she said quietly. You want me manageable. That landed. He said her name for the first time. Not as command. Not as threat, as something closer to warning. Staying will cost you. Leaving will erase me, she replied. I've already lost too much to vanish. The car slowed. He signaled the driver without looking. The vehicle stopped in front of a venue lit too brightly to be discreet. She recognized it immediately. Public, notorious, visible. You're not serious, she said. He opened the door. You said you wanted choice. The irreversible change pressed down as she realized what he was doing. He wasn't forcing disappearance. He was testing defiance. She stepped out before he could reconsider. Cameras noticed immediately. Not press. Not official. Just phones. The city's peripheral vision. She stood beside him. Not behind. Not hidden. The listener orientation line echoed again. Visibility is a declaration. He felt the shift the second she didn't retreat. This makes you a target, he said under his breath. I already was, she answered. I just wasn't acknowledged. They walked together, not touching. That restraint spoke louder than possession. The whispers started instantly. She heard her name passed mouth to mouth. She felt the recalibration in the air, people adjusting risk matrices, enemies updating assumptions. This changes things, he murmured. That was the point, she said. They reached the entrance. Someone bowed, not to him, to both of them. That single gesture rewrote hierarchy. She felt the consequences ripple outward. She had chosen presence over erasure. She had chosen declaration over safety, and declarations demanded response. Inside, the noise swallowed them, music, laughter, false normalcy. He leaned close. If you stay, he said, I won't be able to pull you out later. I know, she replied. That's why I stayed. He studied her, not with hunger, but calculation, newly infected with something else. Respect maybe, fear definitely. You've just made enemies you can't see, he said. They already existed, she answered. Now they'll show themselves. That was the real danger. Not the threat, but the clarity. She felt eyes on her from places she couldn't map. She felt lines being drawn, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that her refusal to disappear had shifted the board for everyone. The cliffhanger tightened around the moment like a closing fist. The question wasn't whether she was endangered, it was who would pay first for her choice. The first body fell without announcement. That was how she knew it was retaliation. Not chaos, no sirens, no shouting, no spectacle, just absence. The man who used to stand near the entrance every night didn't show up again, no explanation was offered. The space where he belonged simply closed around the missing shape. She felt it before she understood it. The listener orientation line pressed into her chest like a verdict. Protection always leaves a trail. She asked no questions at first, she watched. Patterns. She noticed how conversations ended when she entered rooms, how phones were silenced instead of checked, how routes changed without discussion. This wasn't violence meant to scare her, it was violence meant to stabilize a system that now included her. She confronted him after the third disappearance. Not in public. Not with witnesses. She waited until the city slept and the house went quiet. "This is because of me," she said. He didn't deny it, that was worse. "It's because of alignment," he corrected. "Your presence changed incentives." She felt cold settle into her bones. "You're killing people to keep me standing next to you." He looked at her then fully. "People were already dead," he said. "They just hadn't stopped moving yet." That was the moral collapse. She realized he wasn't escalating, he was clarifying. The city had always run on blood. She had simply given it a new direction. She remembered the offer to disappear, the clean exit, the erasure. She saw now that staying hadn't just endangered her, it had accelerated consequences for everyone orbiting too close. "Who was it?" she asked. He named no one. "Names make it personal," he said. "This isn't." That was the lie he needed to function. Because it was personal now, it was personal the moment someone died, so she could walk into a room without being challenged. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping normally. She started counting breaths when silence lasted too long. She noticed how staff avoided her eyes, not out of fear of her, but fear of what acknowledging her represented. She carried an invisible tally of costs. And it kept growing. He tried to soften it in small ways. Protective gestures. Framed as care, information withheld for her peace. Each kindness felt heavier than the last because she understood what funded it. She stood beside him during a meeting when the message was delivered, not spoken. Just a nod across the table. She felt the shift in the room. The irreversible change locked into place. She wasn't adjacent anymore. She was infrastructure, after that night. His name and hers were spoken together. Not romantically, not scandalously, strategically. She was no longer a variable. She was an anchor. The alignment was complete. She confronted him again, voice low. "You could have let me leave. And lose control," he said. "Or let someone else use you against me." "You're using me," she replied. "I'm absorbing the cost," he corrected. "That's leadership." She laughed then, but it broke strangely in her throat. "You're calling this protection." "It is," he said. "For you." "At what point," she asked, "does protection become ownership?" He didn't answer. That silence was an answer. She felt something else then. Not fear, not love, a grim understanding. She had crossed a threshold where moral math stopped being theoretical. She was alive because others weren't. And the system would not allow that imbalance to go unpaid. She noticed her reflection later, alone. The way she stood had changed. The way her eyes tracked exits automatically. The way she didn't flinch at the idea of violence anymore. That scared her more than the deaths. She hadn't ordered anything, but she hadn't left either. That made her complicit. The listener orientation line returned, unavoidable. Protection always leaves a trail, and she was standing in it. He came to her near dawn, voice quieter than usual. "This is the last adjustment," he said. "After this, it stabilizes." She looked at him, the man whose attachment had rewritten rules. "And then what?" she asked. "Then we live with what it cost," he said. He reached for her hand. She let him. That was the final alignment, not because she wanted comfort, but because pulling away would change nothing. She understood then that love wasn't the right word. This wasn't love. It was consequence wearing intimacy's shape. The cliffhanger tightened as the truth settled in. Can love survive once it kills? Or does it simply rename the damage and keep moving forward? By morning the city looked ordinary again. That was how resets worked. No barricades, no sirens, no apologies. Just absence where tension used to breathe. The names that had carried threat were gone. Not arrested, not negotiated with, erased. She learned this without being told. She felt it in the quiet weight of the air. The phones that rang once and stopped, the routes that reopened without comment. The way guards relaxed their shoulders as if muscle memory was being rewritten. Threats erased. Evidence burned. Not theatrically, not to make a point, but thoroughly. She stood by the window as dawn thinned the dark and watched the city return to routine. That routine was built on forgetting. He joined her without sound. She didn't turn. He didn't need acknowledgement. They both knew what had happened during the night. She asked one question. Is it finished? He paused, then said, finished enough. That answer carried a cost. She understood the distinction. He didn't promise safety. He promised stability. She thought of the path she almost took. The one that existed before her name became strategy, a legal exit, a quiet relocation, papers waiting to be signed, a version of herself that could have disappeared without consequence. That path no longer existed. He confirmed it without ceremony. I closed it, he said. It was a vulnerability. The final irreversible act landed gently but decisively. The last path that could free her was destroyed. Not out of anger, not out of jealousy, but out of calculus. She nodded. She felt strangely calm. That scared her. She had expected grief, rage, something loud. Instead there was a settling, a quiet acceptance that felt like the end of movement. The listener orientation line arrived uninvited and absolute. Silence returned heavier than fear. She tested it. She stepped into the hallway alone. No escort, no whispered instructions. Nothing happened. That was the proof. The city had adjusted to her presence. She had become accounted for. She returned to him and asked the question that had waited all night. What happens now? He didn't answer immediately. He watched the light move across the floor like it mattered. Now you live, he said. And the cost stays buried. She almost laughed again but didn't. She thought of the people who would never wake up to this morning, their absence now invisible. She felt the moral weight settle behind her eyes, not crushing, just permanent. She understood then that fear had never been her problem. She didn't fear him. She didn't fear the city. She feared the version of herself that could adapt to this without breaking, because adaptation was how systems won. She spent the morning moving through rooms that now felt different, not hostile, not welcoming, owned by momentum. She noticed how people deferred to her without being told, how decisions adjusted around her presence. That power didn't thrill her. It exhausted her. He watched her carefully, as if gauging whether she would try to run anyway. She didn't. She had learned the shape of the cage. It wasn't walls. It was consequence. She confronted him once more, not to accuse, but to clarify. If I had left, she said, would this have ended differently? He considered it. It would have taken longer, he said, and cost more people. That was the truth as he saw it. She believed him. That belief was the most dangerous thing she had done. She understood him. Understanding stripped away illusions. It made his choices legible. It made his attachment predictable. It also made it harder to pretend innocence. She stood beside him again as the day unfolded. No announcement, no declaration. Just alignment reinforced by quiet repetition. She realized that love had never been offered as salvation. It was offered as integration. She didn't fear him. She understood him. And understanding meant she could no longer claim ignorance. That was the real binding force. Not romance, not terror, comprehension. She returned to the window once more as the city fully woke, children walking. Unaware. Traffic resuming as if nothing had happened, as if the night hadn't rearranged futures. She felt the echo settle into her chest. She hadn't chosen this world. She had stayed long enough to be chosen by it to be why morning the truth was clear, and his world survival wasn't about escape. It was about knowing exactly what you were standing inside. And choosing not to look away.